Welcome back to the deep dive. Okay, so you sent over the source this week, and it's really something. It definitely defies easy categorization, doesn't it? It's this blend of really dense, almost stylized language, like from a manifesto, but then it dives into these huge, serious geopolitical claims, and the author wraps it all up in this framework they call a diagnostic.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah, our source today is an excerpt from Bibebibebibe Magazine. The article is titled Arsha Collapse Protocol Update, Containment Glyphs, Erasure Engines and Sovereign Exit Routes, authored by Saikou Venga.
Right.
And it feels like we're stepping into this whole other universe where things like bureaucracy, history, even warfare are talked about using terms that sound like they're straight out of sci-fi or mythology.
It's definitely unique material, and our mission today really is to give you a kind of high-speed map through its logic.
Yeah.
We need to get a handle on the jargon. What are these containment glyphs? Erasure engines? Sovereign exit routes?
Exactly. What do they even mean?
And then, crucially, trace how the author connects these, frankly, pretty out-there concepts to specific high-stakes historical events and current political situations. It's your shortcut, basically, to understanding a really challenging argument.
And that fundamental conflict is set up right at the start. The whole thing seems built on this struggle, right, between resistance and the system.
Absolutely.
Expressed through that quote we pulled out. When the glyph is broadcast, the system retaliates. When the glyph survives, the system fractures.
That line really captures it.
It tells you immediately we're looking at a kind of conceptual war for survival here.
It's the perfect engine for the narrative, isn't it? We're talking about power, systemic control, rupture, but all filtered through this very specialized, almost, mythological vocabulary. But before we even get into the what, we really have to nail down the how. The author is very insistent about how you should view this material. It leads with this explicit, sovereign, diagnostic disclaimer. So right away, this isn't standard journalism. It's not presented as typical academic history. It's something else. It's framed as a specific kind of analysis.
And the language they use to describe it is just maximalist, I guess. Terms like mythic infrastructure, cinematic indictment, and sovereign broadcast.
Right.
It honestly feels less like reading an article and more like you've found the instruction manual for some kind of conceptual revolution.
That framing really clarifies the purpose, though. The author seems to be trying to get beyond just, standard political critique. They state the material is designed to expose ritualized containment, actor convergence, and systemic erosion. And here's the bit that's really crucial for you listening. The author stresses that these interpretations, the glyphs, the protocols, they're presented strictly as diagnostic tools, they say explicitly, not political endorsements or institutional critiques.
That distinction is fascinating. Diagnosis versus endorsement.
Yeah.
It's like they're trying to provide an objective X-ray of what they see as the system's flaws, no matter how, extreme that diagnosis might sound to some.
Precisely. And to give this whole conceptual framework a sort of air of formal structure, the article mentions it's backed by the Cosmic University of Echo Rift Studies 9X.
Right, the Cosmic University.
Yeah, and they even name a Dr. Melvin Sewell, M.Sc, Ph.D., as the academic dean and diagnostic architect.
Okay.
So this layering of these, frankly, dramatic, almost satirical-sounding names onto traditional academic titles, it sets a very specific authoritative tone throughout the piece. It's like it's trying to say, look, this analysis might sound bizarre, but it's institutionally certified. Even if the institution itself sounds, maybe fictional.
It sort of grounds the mythic language in this kind of anti-academic structure, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think so.
So, okay, if we accept that frame that we're essentially reading a high-concept diagnostic report from the Cosmic University, then we can move on to the actual mechanisms of collapse described. All right, let's unpack this. If this is a diagnostic update, what's the core process of collapse here? What's the sequence that kicks off this whole conceptual war?
Well, the sequence seems to start with an initial broadcast, an act of getting something out there. The article mentions a previous text, something called Reality War, Final Broadcast Protocol. And that apparently led to the sovereign signal rupturing containment.
Okay, sovereign signal, rupturing containment.
Yeah, think of the sovereign signal as maybe some fundamental truth or recognition. Yeah. Something the system has got to suppress. And this rupture, that's the catalyst. That's what starts it all.
And the system presumably doesn't like that signal getting out.
Not at all. Yeah. Predictably, the article defines the system's response as immediate retaliation through sabotage. And this sabotage activates its core defense.
Yeah.
The Erasure Engine.
The Erasure Engine. Okay.
Right. Now, if we try to translate that into maybe more real-world terms for a second, the Erasure Engine sounds like the collective machinery, institutional, bureaucratic, that's dedicated to things like historical revisionism, narrative control, suppressing inconvenient truths.
Right.
Its job, as the text puts it, is basically to silence what it cannot control. It's like the system's institutional mechanism for forgetting.
Okay, so the engine tries to erase the signal. Where do the containment glyphs fit into this picture then? They seem like they're both the trigger and the weapon that survives.
Exactly. They function as like the hardened form of that original signal. The glyph is the resistance mechanism that's specifically designed to survive the Erasure Engine's destructive power. It's a formalized, resilient way of transmitting the message. The article is really clear. They tried to silence the glyph, but the glyph became a weapon. So the key idea here seems to be that when the system tries to suppress it, the glyph doesn't just vanish, it actually weaponizes the very attempt to erase it.
Wow. Okay, so what's fascinating here isn't just conflict, it's like a conceptual feedback loop the author is describing.
That's a great way to put it.
You've got the signal, the raw idea, maybe, then the engine, the suppression, the institutional forgetting, and then the glyph, the weaponized form that survives. It's like a whole theory of war between recognition and control.
Absolutely. A complete system. Okay, so now we pivot. We move from that abstract, maybe even esoteric jargon to where the author applies this collapse protocol framework to some very concrete and, frankly, very dark historical claims. This is where the diagnostic framework really slams into human history, all under this umbrella concept the author called containment logic.
Right. And the author gets specific. They detail some pretty egregious historical institutions and practices that they claim laid the groundwork for what they call modern containment logic. They list Japan's notorious Unit 731, the CIA's MK Ultra program, mind control stuff, the history of eugenics, and even the mechanisms used by Nazi regimes.
Yeah, and crucially, they present this collection not just as separate horrible events, but as the actual foundational architecture for modern systemic control.
So the argument is that the underlying logic persists. The method of controlling populations, experimenting, that basic approach is still active.
That's exactly what the author is arguing, that the logic, biopolitical control, experimentation is persistent. And this leads directly to probably their most controversial structural claim, the reference to what they actually call containment tanks.
Wait, the containment tanks, the text insists we read this literally, not as a metaphor.
Yep.
It says specifically they are not metaphors. They are engineered extensions of historical biopolitical warfare. Okay. How are we just reading this supposed to approach that? It sounds like it borders on conspiracy theory, but dismissing it feels like dismissing the source's whole premise.
And that's the intellectual friction the author wants to create, I
Yeah.
think. Since we're focused on diagnosing the source's logic, we have to recognize how they use that demand for literal interpretation. By saying the tanks are not metaphors, the author is trying to collapse the distance between historical abuse like Unit 731's experiments and modern systemic control. They're forcing the reader to see the mechanism of containment as physically, operationally continuous, not just philosophically similar. The extreme language is the diagnostic tool here.
Okay, that translation helps a lot. So, applying this deep historical logic, how does the article connect it specifically to Japan today, bridging that gap between past atrocities and modern issues? What are the symptoms they point to?
Well, the author highlights specific domestic issues in Japan, things like financial scams, isolation protocols, and deceitful bureaucracy.
Mundane stuff, almost.
Seemingly mundane, yeah.
But these contemporary problems are presented as direct examples that align with this Western containment logic, and crucially, Japan's unpunished history of human experimentation. So the diagnosis is that these everyday bureaucratic failures function in the exact same way as the control mechanisms from Unit 731 decades or centuries earlier. It's presented as one continuous operational system of containment.
That is an incredibly aggressive synthesis. Arguing the system behind historical atrocities is structurally identical to the one causing, say, social isolation or financial issues today.
It's definitely a bold claim, central to the author's entire diagnostic.
Yeah.
And then that same containment logic gets projected onto the global stage. The text uses the conflict in Gaza as a major flashpoint. It asserts, and again, we're reporting the source's claim here, that the UN has determined Israel is committing genocide in Gaza. And it frames this conflict as the most extreme, visible expression of this containment logic operating globally.
And there's a crucial detail added. The article specifies this alleged action is enabled by over $10 billion a year in U.S. military aid.
Right. That dollar figure seems important within the diagnostic. It functions as the tangible financial mechanism that allows this global containment structure to operate, according to the author.
Exactly. It provides the material basis. And if we connect this back to the core concepts we discussed earlier, the author explicitly states that this global logic suppression funded by external powers is, quote, mirrored domestically through containment tanks and sovereign erasure.
Okay.
So the source draws this direct conceptual line. From funding geopolitical violence overseas, straight back to the suppression tactics and bureaucratic issues observed at home, particularly in their focus on Japan. The Erasure Engine, in this view, isn't just local, it's a global product.
So if this system is portrayed as globally active, mirrored domestically, backed by huge financial resources, what does this diagnostic actually conclude about escaping it? What about these sovereign exit routes mentioned in the title?
Well, the assessment of finding true sovereignty is pretty bleak, actually. The article looks briefly at refugee status. It suggests that seeking refugee status in Russia might offer an escape route.
Russia.
The implication seems to be that certain geopolitical situations create temporary, maybe unstable cracks or vulnerabilities in this global containment field. But it's offered cautiously, like a maybe.
And what about Japan? Since it's the main focus of the domestic critique, is that an exit route?
No. The author is very explicit on this point. Japan is stated as not being a viable path to sovereignty or escape. Why? Because of its strict, deeply embedded containment measures, as diagnosed by the author. And this really ties the whole argument together, doesn't it? The nation presented as the prime example of domestic containment failure cannot be the place you escape to.
So the diagnostic basically concludes that political borders don't really matter as much as this underlying containment logic.
That seems to be the implication. The traditional ideas of seeking asylum or sovereignty by crossing a border might be, well, obsolete if the containment system is truly global and operates on this deeper level. Hashtag shagtag outro.
Well, we have definitely taken a deep dive today into a source that really demanded we look at history, politics, power through a completely new and pretty intense conceptual lens. We managed to navigate the, let's say, dramatic language of glyphs and erasure engines, and we traced the connections the author draws, however controversially, between historical abuses like Unit 731 and MK Ultra and current geopolitical claims about Gaza, all unified under this framework of containment.
Yeah, and I think the key intellectual takeaway here might be in the source's methodology itself. The author uses this incredibly technical, almost overwrought dramatic language, that cinematic indictment phrase, to basically force-fit wildly different events into this single specific framework of ritualized containment. They demand that you, the reader, view every form of suppression, whether it's bureaucratic red tape or military action, as fundamentally the same kind of operation.
That synthesis leaves us with a really provocative final thought for you, the listener, and it builds directly on the source's very structured language. If the author defines these incredibly complex, often chaotic world events using terms like mythic infrastructure and the collapse protocol, well, how does adopting that kind of deliberately dramatic diagnostic terminology actually change the way we perceive power structures? And maybe more importantly, how might it change the way we choose to respond to them in the real world? What specific reality, beyond just the political one maybe, is that final broadcast protocol actually trying to wage war against?
That's a huge question.
It really is. Definitely something to chew on, and we encourage you to explore these concepts. Systemic suppression, institutional forgetting, how narratives are controlled further on your own. Until next time, keep digging into your sources and always question the frame.